Thanks for joining us again. 12 minutes of learning, and let's go. So the first question that came is, how do I start a small group? How do I start a small group? I'm a new youth pastor, and I want to get a small group going. I hear people talk about it all the time, and I need to know how to do that. So let me begin by saying this. If you are creating disciples as a youth pastor, okay, check this out. If you're creating disciples as a youth pastor, you're going to see that Wednesday nights, whenever you meet, right, Friday nights, Sunday nights, whatever, that youth service setting, that's not enough, okay? Now, I do believe that the theology begins with preaching and teaching, but it's best when it's done in discipleship settings, for sure. I don't think you have to replace Wednesday night or the youth service, the community thing. I don't think you have to replace that and just do the small group setting. That's a whole nother discussion, and there are youth groups across the country who have gone that way, and there are some who've gone that way and have come back. So that we've talked about that. You can go back on the other episodes and see that. So as a youth pastor who wants to start a new small group, let me give you two things that you can do, because I want to move on to these other questions too. First of all, train leaders. You must begin a small group ministry by training leaders, because if you're not training leaders, then first of all, it's just going to you're going to be too busy, right, without that delegation. And secondly, the funnel is going to come right to you. Events. You're probably doing worship already. Planning, scheduling, counseling, preaching, teaching, campus visitation. Everything else you're doing is funneled to you too, right? So it really begins with delegation and leadership training, and finding the right people who can handle that crowd, who can handle the teaching and small group, right? So leadership development comes first. The second thing is you need some host homes that are adults who can house this and bring that maturity to it, and bring a place to it. I would strongly recommend not going to the church for small group. We got to get outside of the church. You've heard me talk about this many times, into neutral site settings, okay? So in beginning a small group, youth leadership is number one in training youth leadership, and number two, finding a great host home. Now, you could also, instead of just meeting in a home all the time, you could meet in neutral site settings in the community, whether that's at the mall, whether that's at a coffee shop, whether that's at a park, when the weather's right, whether that's at an airport. I've done all of those settings. The gymnasium, you go to the school and do small group there. So there's a lot of different settings to do that. But to begin them, understand theology and how important it is that you are giving an opportunity or a place or a setting to go deeper into theology, right? That's the small group setting. Leadership training, and hosts, adult hosts who can get into that, okay? Let me move on to the next question. I love this one. I'm dating long distance and I'm worried. I'm dating long distance and I'm worried. The question came from a teenager who actually said that this teenager is worried that this other person that right in the picture is going to like somebody else. I don't have control over this, right? Well, first of all, let me say, you need to thank God you're dating long distance, okay? Just ask people who are dating short distance how difficult that can be with a lot of areas, okay? So, number one, how do you deal with that? Thank God that you are dating long distance, okay? Number two, you don't need a boy or a girl. Your relationship will be best. It will be most healthy whether you're dating, engaged, or married. Your relationship will be best when you understand you don't need each other, okay? You don't need a boy, you don't need a girl. You need God. And if you'll set that straight, okay, if you set that straight, then the relationship will be. Because two halves don't make a whole in relationships. 50-50 doesn't make a relationship. You need to be 100% right before you need somebody else. So third, on that long distance thing, trust, okay? if there are trust issues and fear issues, the relationship isn't right at this point. Okay, so you need to get that relationship right, and that begins with getting you right. All right, so that's the long distance relationship thing. That's good. I'm glad that came up. Third question, and this goes along with small groups a little bit. The question came from a youth pastor. What about mandatory reporting? Okay, what about mandatory reporting of issues that come up in the discussions? Okay, now this is a big discussion, and I want to give you just some basic principles with mandatory reporting, because there are filing forms that you must legally file in certain cases, okay? And those filing forms are not something that you keep with you. That's something that you'll need to do with this advice I'm going to give you, okay? So first of all, mandatory reporting. Everyone in the ministry needs to understand this, whether it's people you are counseling, whether it's people that are in the small group, right? They need to know that you are not a tell-all and a bank on some of these areas, and you're never going to bring this up again, and that it's all safe with you. Don't do that. That's not fair, because that will get you in trouble, because it's called mandatory reporting for a reason, okay? So let me give you just a couple of things. First, communicate to everybody that there are moments when you may have to share information to save a life, to spare life, right? Especially when it comes with minors. Second, make sure that on staff, whether you are a full-time youth leader, you're paid by the church and you're controlled by the church, or you are a volunteer, that you have an understanding with the lead pastor of their processes that the church has. Those processes will include things like child welfare reporting, a relationship with somebody in the child welfare system, okay? Every city that I was in, I had a relationship with the child welfare department. So you need to make sure, whether that's somebody that attends the church, or you just make the phone calls and say, listen, I'm in youth counseling, I'm in youth development work, right? What do I have to do if something comes up? Because then you'll have the plan in front of you, right? So you're communicating to the crowd, to the people. You're communicating to the pastor, right? The lead pastor, maybe the board in your setting. That's important too. And then finally, a relationship with the child welfare department. And that may be as simple as getting their mandatory forms, because there are legislative forms. There are forms that are legislated to you that you have to fill out. Okay, so that's really important. All right, and then the final one is, how do we handle sexual identity issues? Okay, how do we handle sexual identity issues? Here's what I want to do, because of all of the things that are going on and this issue being so intricate, it's prevalent because of the sexual revolution that we're going through. This is something that is so important to deal with. So what I want to do is just kind of lead into this question by saying, come back next week, okay? I really want to identify this. Some of you know how important this is to me, and I want to unpack this to you so that this is a strength of yours and not a weakness or a fear, right? Because you may not think about it as adults and as youth leaders, but the students are going through it all the time, okay? So what I'll say initially with this is, we cannot treat the sexual identity issues that come up, okay? We cannot treat those with kid gloves or with fear and back away. If we don't have the answers to the questions that people are asking, what good is it to have answers to questions people aren't asking? And I believe that our culture needs a church that is relevant, consistent, okay? And hear me, both truth and grace. Okay? We can't separate them. And many people have separated those, truth and grace, and get messed up. So I want to really promo next week. I'm going to deal with that next week and give you some resources for that. The question came late this afternoon, and as excited as I am to talk about it, we have 12 minutes, and I've already gone, about 10 and a half or 11 minutes already. So I really want to make sure that we cover that completely. Okay, so next week, Youthology Live, which will be episode 20, okay, a week from tonight, we're going to deal with the sexual identity issues. How, as youth leaders, do we handle those discussions? Okay, because listen, oftentimes it's not even a question, it's discussions. Okay, people have their statements, and so how do we approach that? I believe that the scriptures give us great response to the culture. Okay, I believe that the scripture gives us a great response to the culture. There's no ambiguity here. As often as people say, the Bible doesn't say much about that. Yes, it does. It's very clear, okay? Very clear. So I want to deal with that next week, so don't miss next week when we deal with the whole sexual identity, the gender identity, the sexual revolution. I'm going to put it all together there and hopefully go a little deeper than being able to do that right now, okay? So thank you for joining us. This has been Youthology Live on Sunday nights, and we dealt with, real quick, I can just recover those. How do I start small groups? Dating long distance, what does that look like? The mandatory reporting in our counseling with teenagers, and then finally, handling the sexual identity and the gender identity issues in youth ministry. And we're going to tackle that last question next week, okay? So, hey, have a great week. Thank you for joining us, even for a few minutes. And you can check us out at youthology.com. I'll have it all blogged and break down the answers to this and more, get into detail. Go to youtube.com/Jeff Grinnell, and you can catch it there too. And our iTunes is coming. We are downloading it onto our iTunes. It's just taken a while. Been busy. So that's going to come too. But for now, you catch us on social media, and you'll see all of this come up early this week. God bless you. Have a great week.